Please like and subscribe, my favorite viewer. I hope you will be interested in listening to my story. Enjoy your listening experience. The first time Eliza noticed him was on a Tuesday evening in late October, when autumn had just begun to paint the city in shades of amber and gold. She had claimed her usual spot at Café Lumière, a small bistro tucked away on a quiet corner of the city's arts district. The table by the window had become her sanctuary over the past few months, a place where she could edit photographs, sip herbal tea, and watch the world go by. She was working on a particularly challenging set of wedding photos when he walked in, shaking raindrops from his coat. Tall, with dark, wavy hair that curled slightly at his collar, he had the kind of face that seemed both gentle and resolute at once. He ordered at the counter, then looked around for a seat in the crowded cafe. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Eliza felt an unexpected flutter in her chest before quickly returning her attention to her laptop screen. "Excuse me," a voice said minutes later. "Would you mind if I shared your table? Everywhere else is full." She looked up to find him standing there, coffee in hand, raindrops still clinging to his shoulders. Up close, his eyes were a warm shade of brown that reminded her of the tea she was drinking. "Not at all," she replied, moving her bag from the empty chair. "I'm Daniel," he said, extending his hand. "Eliza," she responded, surprised by the pleasant warmth of his palm against hers. They worked in companionable silence for nearly an hour, she with her photographs, he with a dog-eared copy of a novel she had read last summer. Occasionally, she would glance up and catch him looking at her work with undisguised interest. "You're a photographer?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. "I am. Wedding photographer by profession, street photographer by passion." He nodded toward her screen. "These are beautiful. You really capture the emotion of the moment." The conversation flowed easily after that. He was a literature professor at the local university, specializing in contemporary fiction. He came to Café Lumière every Tuesday to grade papers and escape his noisy apartment building. She told him about her journey from corporate photography to starting her own business, and her dream of someday publishing a book of street photography. "What's your favorite thing to photograph?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "Hands?" She answered without hesitation. They tell so much about a person's life. The calluses, the scars, the way they move when someone is explaining something they're passionate about. Daniel looked down at his own hand, strong, with long fingers and a small ink stain on his right index finger. "I've never thought about hands that way before." When the cafe announced closing time, neither of them had noticed the hours passing. They stood outside under the awning, watching the rain form puddles on the sidewalk. "Would you like to get dinner sometime?" Daniel asked, his voice soft against the patter of rainfall. "I know a great Italian place not far from here." "I'd like that," Eliza said, feeling warmth spread through her despite the chill in the air. They exchanged numbers, and he waited with her until her rideshare arrived. As she waved goodbye through the car window, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, the delicious anticipation of possibility. Their first dinner date was at Rosalinda's, a family-owned Italian restaurant where the walls were lined with photographs of the Amalfi Coast, and the air was rich with the scent of garlic and fresh herbs. Daniel wore a dark blue button-down that brought out the gold flecks in his eyes, and Eliza chose a deep green dress that made her feel both elegant and comfortable. "I've been looking forward to this all week," he admitted as they clinked glasses of Chianti. "Me too," she confessed, surprised by her own honesty. They shared plates of handmade pasta and stories of their lives. He told her about growing up in a small town in Maine, with 3 older sisters who still called him every Sunday without fail. She described her childhood in Chicago as the only child of architect parents who had instilled in her an appreciation for the beauty in everyday structures. "That explains your eye for composition," Daniel observed. "Your photos have this incredible architectural quality to them, the way you frame light and shadow." No one had ever articulated her work that way before, and Eliza felt seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. When he walked her home, the night air was crisp with the promise of winter. They strolled slowly, neither in a hurry to end the evening. Outside her apartment building, Daniel gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice a whisper. Eliza nodded, and when his lips met hers, she felt as though all the photographs she had ever taken, every captured moment of joy and connection, had been leading her to this. Over the next few months, their relationship blossomed like a time-lapse of spring flowers. Tuesday evenings at Café Lumière became their tradition. Sometimes they worked side by side in comfortable silence. Other times they talked for hours, their laptops forgotten. Daniel became her favorite subject to photograph, though he always blushed and protested when she aimed her camera at him. She captured him grading papers, his brow furrowed in concentration, laughing with his head thrown back at something she'd said, cooking dinner in her kitchen with sleeves rolled up and flour on his cheek. "You're making me into something I'm not," he said once, when she showed him a particularly striking black and white portrait. "No," she replied, running her finger along the image of his jawline. "I'm just showing you what I see." In the photograph, he looked both vulnerable and strong, his expression open and honest. It was, Eliza thought, the essence of who Daniel was, a man who chose authenticity over pretense, who lived with his heart as accessible as the books he loved to discuss. On a snowy evening in December, Daniel invited her to a faculty holiday party. Eliza wore a red dress that made her dark hair shine like obsidian, and when he saw her, the look in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "My colleagues are going to love you," he promised as they entered the elegantly decorated home of the department chair. And they did. She chatted with literature professors about the parallels between photography and poetry, debated the merits of digital versus film with an art history instructor, and ended up exchanging business cards with a novelist who needed new author photos. Later, as they slow danced in a corner of the living room to "The Way You Look Tonight," Daniel held her close and whispered, "Thank you for coming tonight. You fit so perfectly into my world." "And you into mine," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. When they left the party, fat snowflakes were falling silently, transforming the city into a wonderland. They walked through the empty streets, leaving footprints that quickly filled with fresh snow. At her apartment, she asked him to stay the night, not for the first time, but somehow this night felt different, more significant. In her bedroom, with only the glow of string lights illuminating their bodies, they undressed each other slowly. Eliza traced the constellation of freckles across Daniel's shoulders, memorizing them like stars she could navigate by. He kissed every inch of her with reverence, as though she were a rare book he wanted to know by heart. Their bodies moved together in perfect rhythm, like a dance they had always known the steps to. Afterward, as they lay tangled in her sheets, Eliza felt a sense of homecoming she had never experienced before. "I think I'm falling in love with you," Daniel whispered against her hair. She raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "I think I already have," she admitted. He pulled her close, and as snow continued to fall outside her window, Eliza knew that whatever happened next, this moment, this perfect, quiet moment of connection would stay with her always, like the most beautiful photograph she had ever taken. Spring arrived, and with it came an opportunity for Eliza Chance to showcase her street photography in a small but well-respected gallery. The night of the opening, she was a bundle of nerves. "What if no one understands what I'm trying to say?" she asked Daniel as they stood in her apartment, him adjusting his tie, her fidgeting with her earrings. "They will," he assured her. "And even if they don't, I do. That's something, isn't it?" At the gallery, surrounded by her photographs and people discussing them earnestly, Eliza felt a surreal sense of accomplishment. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a series called Everyday Intimacies, images capturing small, tender moments between strangers on city streets, an elderly couple holding hands on a park bench, a father braiding his daughter's hair at a bus stop, two friends embracing in reunion outside a train station. What Eliza hadn't told anyone was that the final photograph in the series was of Daniel, taken the moment he had first said he loved Harris' face, half in shadow, half in light, his eyes looking directly into the camera with complete openness. When the gallery owner introduced her to speak, Eliza looked out at the crowd and found Daniel's encouraging smile. "Photography, for me, has always been about connections," she began. "Finding the threads that bind us to each other, even in the most fleeting moments." As she spoke, she realized she was no longer nervous. "These photographs are my way of saying that intimacy isn't just found in grand gestures or milestone moments. It's in the everyday choices we make to be present with each other, to really see each other." After her speech, as guests mingled and discussed the exhibition, Daniel pulled her into a quiet corner. "I am so incredibly proud of you," he said, cupping her face in his hands, "and I have something for you." From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a camera aperture. "Open it," he encouraged. The pendant was a locket. Inside was a tiny photography she had never seen before. It showed her at Café Lumière, the day they had met, completely absorbed in her work, a small smile playing on her lips. "You took this?" she asked, surprised. Daniel nodded. "Before I gathered the courage to ask if I could share your table, you looked so beautiful, so in your element. I couldn't help myself." Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes. "So you were a photographer all along?" "Just that once," he said with a smile. "Some moments you just have to capture." As he fastened the necklace around her throat, his fingers warm against her skin, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that this connection, this understanding, this love was what she had been trying to capture in her photographs all along, and now, somehow, miraculously, it was hers to keep. Summer arrived with a wave of heat that transformed the city. Eliza found herself with a packed schedule of weddings to photograph, while Daniel taught a summer course on contemporary women writers. Their busy lives meant they treasured their moments together even more. One sweltering July evening, after Eliza had spent 10 hours documenting a lavish wedding at a countryside estate, she returned to her apartment to find Daniel waiting with a picnic basket and a bottle of chilled wine. "You look exhausted," he said, kissing her forehead. "I thought we could have dinner on the roof instead of going out." The rooftop of Eliza's building offered a stunning view of the city skyline. They spread a blanket in the corner, away from the other residents enjoying the communal space, and Daniel unpacked containers of olives, cheese, crusty bread, and fresh berries. "You always know exactly what I need," Eliza said, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the sky in vibrant pinks and oranges. "Speaking of which," Daniel said, reaching into the picnic basket again, "I have something else for you." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a brochure for a 2-week photography workshop in Tuscany, scheduled for late August. "Daniel, this is." She flipped through the glossy pages featuring rolling Italian landscapes and medieval villages. "This is incredible, but I can't possibly." "Before you say no," he interrupted gently, "I've already talked to Julia about covering your scheduled shoots." Julia was Eliza's assistant, a talented photographer in her own right. "And the workshop director was thrilled when I sent her your portfolio. You're in if you want it." Eliza stared at him, overwhelmed. "You did all this for me?" He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that had become so familiar and dear to her. "You've been talking about wanting to expand beyond wedding photography. This seemed like the perfect opportunity." She threw her arms around him, nearly knocking over their wine glasses. "Thank you," she whispered against his neck. "But what about us? 2 weeks is a long time." Daniel smiled. "Well, I was thinking I might come along. Not to the workshop, that's your thing. But I could explore the towns while you're working, find some quiet cafes to grade papers, and then we could meet up in the evenings. If you want the company, that is." Eliza couldn't speak for a moment, overcome with emotion. This man, who had walked into her life by chance less than a year ago, had become the person who understood her dreams sometimes better than she did herself. "There's nothing I would want more," she finally said. Tuscany was everything Eliza had imagined and more. The workshop was held at a restored farmhouse surrounded by cypress trees and vineyards, with 10 photographers from around the world participating. During the days, they ventured out to capture the landscape, the people, the light that seemed different here, golden and rich, like honey. While Eliza immersed herself in photography, Daniel explored the nearby towns, sending her text messages with photos of narrow cobblestone streets, charming cafes, and booksellers where he'd found treasures in Italian and English. In the evenings, they would reunite, sharing stories of their day over long dinners under the stars. One night, about halfway through their trip, they rented a vintage Vespa and drove to a small hilltop town that Daniel had discovered. They dined at a family restaurant where no one spoke English, ordering by pointing and smiling, and the elderly proprietor treated them like beloved grandchildren, bringing extra dishes per gli innamorati for the lovers. After dinner, they wandered through the town's ancient piazza, where a small group of musicians played traditional folk songs. Without a word, Daniel pulled Eliza into his arms, and they danced under the Italian moon, her head against his chest, his arms strong around her waist. "I could stay here forever," Eliza murmured. "In Italy?" Daniel asked. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the warm glow of the piazza lights. "No, in this moment, with you." Later that night, in their room at a small bed and breakfast, with the windows open to catch the breeze and the sound of distant music still floating in the air, they made love with a new intensity. There was something about being away from their everyday lives, in this ancient place where centuries of lovers had come before them, that made their connection feel both timeless and fragile, precious in its impermanence. As they lay together afterward, Eliza propped herself up on one elbow and traced the outline of Daniel's profile with her finger. "What happens when we go back?" she asked softly. He caught her hand and kissed her palm. "What do you want to happen?" She took a deep breath. I think I want to wake up with you every day, not just sometimes, every day." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. "Are you asking me to move in with you, Eliza Bennett?" "I am," she said, surprised by her own certainty. "Unless you'd rather I move in with you, though your apartment is really tiny." Daniel laughed. "It is. Your place is definitely better. Plus, the light is perfect for your photography." "So, that's a yes?" He pulled her down to him, kissing her deeply. "That's a definite yes." They returned from Italy bronzed by the sun and certain of their future together. The process of moving Daniel into Eliza's apartment was surprisingly smooth. His books found homes on her shelves, his clothes in her closet, his morning coffee routine blending with hers until it felt as though they had always shared this space. There were adjustments, of course. Daniel was meticulously neat, while Eliza tended to create what she called creative chaos when working on editing projects. He was a morning person. She often worked late into the night. But they navigated these differences with humor and patience, finding compromises that allowed them both to thrive. Fall semester began, and Daniel threw himself into teaching. Eliza's photography business continued to grow, especially after her Italian landscapes were featured in a travel magazine. They were busy, sometimes passing like ships in the night, but they established rituals to keep their connection strong. Sunday brunches at their favorite café, Wednesday night films at the art house cinema, notes left in unexpected places for the other to find. One rainy October evening, exactly 1 year after they had met, Daniel suggested they go to Café Lumière. "For old time's sake," he said. When they arrived, Eliza was surprised to find their usual table by the window decorated with a small vase of wildflowers. "Did you arrange this?" she asked, as they sat down. "I might have called ahead," Daniel admitted with a smile. They ordered their usual drink-sherbal tea for her, dark roast coffee for him, and fell into easy conversation about their days. There was something comforting about being back where it all began, Eliza thought, looking at Daniel across the table and remembering that first rainy evening when he had asked to share her table. "Do you remember what we were working on that first night?" Daniel asked, as if reading her thoughts. "I was editing the Wilson wedding photos," Eliza recalled, "and you were reading The Time Traveler's Wife," he finished for her. "I'd read it before, but I was teaching it that semester." He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a well-worn copy of the book. "I brought it tonight, actually." Eliza smiled. "Feeling nostalgic?" "Something like that." He handed her the book. "I thought you might want to borrow it. There's a passage I marked that reminded me of us." Curious, Eliza opened the book to where a leather bookmark had been placed. But instead of a marked passage, she found a hollow cut into the pages, and nestled inside was a ringed, delicate band of rose gold with a small, perfect diamond. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked up to find Daniel watching her, his eyes full of emotion. "I had this whole speech prepared," he said softly, "about fate and chance meetings, and how some people are meant to find each other across time and space." He took the book from her trembling hands and carefully removed the ring. "But now, looking at you here, where everything began, all I really want to say is this. Eliza, you are the love of my life. You see the world in a way that amazes me every day. You've taught me to notice details I would have missed: the way light falls, the stories told in people's hands, the beauty in ordinary moments." He slid out of his chair and knelt beside her, heedless of the other cafe patrons who had fallen silent, watching. "I want to build a life with you where we both pursue our passions and support each other's dreams. I want to travel with you, grow with you, face whatever challenges come our way together." He held up the ring. "Eliza Bennett, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks as she nodded, not trusting her voice. When Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, the cafe erupted in applause and cheers. "Yes," she finally managed to whisper as he pulled her to her feet and into his arms. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." They decided on a spring wedding, to be held at the botanical gardens where Eliza had once done a photography exhibit. The planning process was a whirlwind of decisions: flowers, music, food, guest lists, but through it all, they remained focused on what mattered most: their commitment to each other. "You know," Daniel said one evening as they addressed invitations at their kitchen table, "we never would have met if that cafe hadn't been so crowded that night." Eliza smiled, thinking of all the small coincidences that had brought them together. "Or if I hadn't decided to work there instead of at home, or if you hadn't been teaching that particular novel." "Do you believe in fate?" he asked, setting down his pen. She considered the question. "I believe that life offers us moments of possibility," she said slowly. "Windows that open briefly, and we can either step through them or let them close. I'm grateful every day that we both chose to step through." On their wedding day, the gardens were in full bloom, a riot of color and fragrance. Eliza wore a simple ivory dress with delicate lace details and carried a bouquet of wildflowers similar to those Daniel had placed on their cafe table the night he proposed. He waited for her at the end of a path lined with flowering cherry trees, looking so handsome in his dark blue suit that her heart skipped when she first saw him. They had written their own vows, promises that spoke of partnership, respect, adventure, and unwavering support. As they exchanged rings under an arbor draped with climbing roses, surrounded by their loved ones, Eliza felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The reception was held in a glass conservatory, where fairy lights twinkled among exotic plants and soft music played. They danced their first dance to "The Way You Look Tonight," the same song they had danced to at that faculty party long ago. "Mrs. Eliza Harper," Daniel murmured against her ear as they swayed together, "how does it feel?" "Perfect," she replied, leaning back to look into his eyes, "though I'm keeping Bennett professionally." He smiled. Of course, Eliza Bennett, celebrated photographer, and her slightly less impressive husband, Professor Daniel Harper. She laughed and pulled him closer. "Don't sell yourself short, Professor. You're quite impressive in many ways." As the evening progressed, Eliza found a quiet moment to take some photographs, not as the official photographer, but as a bride wanting to capture memories. She photographed Daniel laughing with his sisters, her parents dancing together, friends from both their lives mingling and forming new connections. And then she handed her camera to her assistant Julia and asked her to take one photo of her and Daniel. They stood by the conservatory windows, the sunset painting the sky behind them, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, both of them radiant with joy. Years later, this would be the photograph they would point to when people asked them about their wedding day. Not the professional portraits or the carefully staged moments, but this one authentic image of two people who had found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were looking for: a home, a haven, a love that made ordinary days extraordinary. And it had all begun with a shared table on a rainy evening, in a café with good lighting and better coffee, where two strangers had taken a chance on connection.